Welcome back to Learn to Play Chess. This is episode 8. You've learnt all the pieces now. I won't go over them because hopefully you're well practiced at that. You're confident, you know what you're doing. We're now looking at the finer things. I mentioned before, didn't I, that the rook looks like a castle. It's not called a castle, but it can do something called castling. So we're going to look at that first of all. I just need to get some other pieces out of the way for a minute. And we're back. So you see I've removed all the back pieces except the two rooks and the king. Now, do you remember I said the king can only move one place, one square at a time? Okay? Sometimes you might want to protect your king. You can do a castling move. And you can only do it once in the game. And you can only do it if the king and the rook that you're castling with have not yet moved. What happens is this. The rook moves to the square next to the king, and then the king comes to the other side of the rook. So here you've now protected the king with a rook to its left and 3 pawns in front. So no other piece can get to it except a knight. And if a knight came to here or here, this pawn can take him. On the other side of the board, let's put that back to where we started, this rook can castle the king. It comes next to the king, and the king comes to the other side of the rook. The only difference being that when you castle from that side, the rooks come 3 places as opposed to coming 2 places. It doesn't really matter. The key thing is the rook comes to next to the king, and then the king comes to the other side of the rook. And on the other side, the rook comes next to the king, and the king comes to the other side of the rook. So you can only do that if neither piece has moved. You can only do it once, and you cannot do it if any of the squares in between are in a check position. So, if the knight was here, that position would be a position the king couldn't move into. And if any of those positions are under a check, say from a rook that's up here, if the pawn's out of the way, or even here if the pawn's out of the way, you cannot castle through a position that's under check. Hopefully that's fairly simple. I did say before that in the game of chess it doesn't matter how many pieces you win, you capture from other opponents, or how many pieces you lose, so long as you can capture the king or put him under checkmate. But of course, the more pieces you've got on the board, the easier that will be. So you've always got to play in a way where you think ahead and you think about protecting your pieces. We've looked at how to win a game of chess, but you can actually draw one as well. Imagine, for example, you've got a situation like this. Just the 2 kings are on the board. Maybe you've been a bit silly, had a lapse in concentration, and you've allowed all your pieces to be captured, maybe because of just a couple of mistakes. And for some reason your opponent has also made mistakes, and you've managed to claw your way back into the game, and you're just left with 2 kings. Well, what are you going to do? You're going to chase this king until the end of time. Because you can never get to a position like that, because you would be moving yourself into a check position. So that would be an illegal move. And the king would just always move away. You can never quite get there. In that situation, that's a draw. You just both agree to stop. So you haven't lost, but you haven't won. Another situation, and I've noticed when we play this on the computer program doesn't really recognise this. But I was told that if you are down just to your king, But your opponents have still got lots of pieces on the board. They should be able to capture you or get you into checkmate. But once your last piece has been taken, you've got 7 moves. Yeah, that knight's now put him in check. He won't go there because the rook's got him under check. This could go on. But if the blacks do not checkmate the king in their next 7 moves, you've won yourself a draw. Now you might like to agree before the start of a game or a tournament you play to either play that rule or not play that rule. As I say, it's one of those things that's not really used a lot, but then I'm not a professional player, I don't go for big tournaments, maybe it is such a big thing when you get into big competitions. But the computer programs don't tend to count how many moves you're making and therefore give you that draw. Imagine you've got this kind of situation at the end of a game. It's rather contrived, but it illustrates the point. You're white, it's your move. At the moment, you're not in check. But up here you've got this rook that's covering this line and this line. Likewise, this rook is covering this line and this line. This bishop is covering this diagonal line here, and this bishop is covering this diagonal line along here. As it's white's move, what can he do? Well, if he moves forward one place, he puts himself in check with the bishop. If he moves diagonally here, he's in check with the rook. Here he's in check with the same rook, and here he's in check with the same rook. And if he moves here, he's in check by this bishop. So although the king is not in check, he cannot make a move into a position that puts him in check. That would be an illegal move. And that is a stalemate. We don't have a thing in chess where if white can't move in this situation, then black can move and finish him off. Because white can't move, no move can be made, the game cannot continue. And that is a type of draw called a stalemate. Now we need to remember, chess is a very polite game. We don't throw pieces, we don't get upset, it's very gentlemanly, and it's all very reserved. It is a game of war, but it's done at a tabletop, done amongst people who respect each other. So we take great care when we are moving our pieces. As pieces are moved around the board, sometimes they don't always get put back right in the middle of the square. Now that doesn't really matter, but if pieces get moved about too much, it can be that they sit something like this. And you think, is this piece in this square or this square? So what you might do before a move is notice this and go to touch the piece to bring it back. If you're just adjusting that piece on its square, you say, I adjust. Now, of course, that's all very formal. You can have an understanding amongst friends where you just say, just centering this piece, mate, or whatever. Okay. Technically, you say it in French. Just like that move with the pawn that we learned right back at the beginning is en passant. To say I adjust in French is something that sounds a little bit like la doube, something like that. I'm not French, I don't speak very much French, and you've probably guessed I don't have a great French accent, so please forgive the pronunciation of that word. But you're simply telling the other person, I'm only touching this piece to centre it on its proper square. Now, if you're playing the full laws of the game, really serious stuff, if you touch a piece, you've got to move it. That is the piece you've got to move. Now, what I would call schoolboy chess is a little rule I've sort of come across in my time where people might do this and they leave their fingers on it, claiming a rule that as they haven't let go, they are allowed to move that piece back or to a different location, and or if it's put back, to move another piece. But that's not the technical rules. So just sit back, think about your next move. Chess is a thinking game. Once you've made your decision, Then get your hand out and move the piece. Don't go touching pieces that you're not going to move.